are back. We are joined by John Lott. He is the Crime Prevention Research Association founder and traditionally an economist. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. First of all, you're traditionally an economist, so why get into crime in the first place, sir?
Well, economics basically deals with the idea of something's more costly, people do less of it. So higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences are all things that make it riskier for criminals to go and commit crime. But, just as if you increase the price of apples, people buy fewer apples. If you make it riskier for criminals to go and commit crime, they commit less crime.
So tell us about founding the Crime Prevention Research Association.
Crime Prevention Research Center, we basically a group of academics who do research on various crime issues, from everything from policing to vote fraud to illegal immigration to gun control type issues. So if it deals with crime, there's at least a reasonable chance that we've looked at it. But we're a group of academics. I've been a researcher most of my adult life in academia, positions at Stanford, University of Chicago, Wharton, Yale, UCLA. And was chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission and senior advisor for research and statistics at the U.S. Department of Justice. We have members of our academic advisory board at Harvard, University of Chicago, Wharton, University of Michigan, other universities. So, we have a range of expertise on a lot of different issues that touch on crime.
So regarding the Second Amendment specifically, when we're looking at this case in California, obviously over the past several decades, we've had more and more restrictions regarding our right to bear arms. This seems like a very, very dangerous decision. Can you talk about that?
Well, California's been imposing a lot of different types of restrictions to make it very difficult for people to be able to go and own guns. I don't make Second Amendment type arguments. To me, what got me interested in this and what keeps my interest is whether or not these different types of gun control laws make people safer or not. The irony is that the same politicians, the Democrats that push things that make it difficult for law enforcement to make it risky for criminals to commit crime, also want to make it difficult for civilians to be able to go and protect themselves and make it risky for criminals to commit crimes directly against them. But California has last fall passed a law that pretty much made it impossible for people to carry permanent concealed handguns pretty much any place in the state. Similar laws have been passed in New York and New Jersey and Maryland. The thing is, you look at it, the concealed carry permit holders in California have been extremely law-abiding, just as they've been law-abiding in the rest of the country. If you look at data, permit holders are convicted of firearms-related violations at about 1/12 the rate that police are convicted of firearms-related violations, and about 1/240th the rate that the general population is convicted of firearms-related violations. So the type of person who goes through and gets a permit tends to be extremely law-abiding.
Now you just talked about one of the most extremely persuasive data points, that those that do go out and get a permit, go through the proper training, have this concealed carry, are committing 1/12 the crimes that even police officers are being charged with. Why is that not the norm? I come from New York State. It's extremely difficult to get a concealed carry permit or a permit in general for a handgun in that state. It may be more difficult in California. I understand that we have a separation of powers within states' rights, but at the same time, a lot of people would argue that constitutional carry is already amongst us. What are your thoughts?
Well, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution applied the Bill of Rights to the states. You had, so the question is, what should people be able to do to be able to go and protect themselves when the police can't be there? And what you find is that by far the safest course of action for somebody to take is to have a gun. And it's particularly beneficial for the most vulnerable people in our society, people who are the most likely victims of violent crime. And that tends to overwhelmingly be poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas and people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. You're almost always talking about a young man doing the crime. And when a man is attacking a woman, there's a lot larger strength difference that exists there on average than when a man is attacking another man. And the presence of a gun represents a much bigger relative change in a woman or an elderly person's ability to go and protect themselves. Look, anybody who's read my academic research knows that I think police are extremely important. I think police are the single most important factor for reducing crime. But the police themselves understand that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occurred. And that raises questions for what people should do when they're having to confront a criminal by themselves. And having a gun tends to be by far the safest course of action for people to be able to go and take. Look, I understand the desire. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
I understand the desire to go and try to create gun-free zones. You think, well, if I simply ban guns from different places, I'm going to make them safer. Unfortunately, the exact opposite is true. That when you go and you ban guns from an area, you actually make it a magnet for criminals to go and attack. Because, I'll give you a simple example. Look at something like the Covenant School shooting in Nashville last year. If you violate the gun-free school zone in Tennessee, you face up to 6 years in prison. 6 years is a big penalty for somebody like you or I or other law-abiding citizens. Our lives would be completely changed if that was the case. But for somebody like the murderer last year who murdered 6 people, let's say that the murderer had lived, they'd be facing, 6 life sentences or 6 death penalties. Is the notion that adding an additional 6 years, they say, well, I can live with 6 life sentences or 6 death penalties, but you take away 6 years from my 7th life there, and that will be, that'll be a real deterrence. It's just not serious. It's no real marginal penalty for them. And so what you've done is, maybe unintentionally, you've set up a system where law-abiding citizens would face real penalties. The criminals really don't face any additional penalty for committing their crime. And so all you've done is ensure that it will be law-abiding citizens who obey the law and will be defenseless. And anybody who reads the diaries or manifestos of these mass murderers know that they're very conscious of this. They are very clear. Their goal is to get media coverage. They want to commit suicide overwhelmingly. They feel unappreciated. They want their names to get media coverage around the world. And they understand that the more people they kill, the more media coverage that they're going to get. And it's not rocket science, but they understand if they go to a place where their victims are defenseless, they're going to be able to go and kill more people than they would have been able to kill otherwise.
Now, one of the other really scary aspects right now, especially in a place like California, is the fact that they've essentially decided not to prosecute a lot of criminals. A lot of people protecting their businesses actually may be prosecuted if, in fact, they use lethal force on an invader or someone who's stealing from them, etc. That's been quite the paradigm shift, that people feel like if they do try to protect themselves, they'll be the ones prosecuted.
Well, they don't even need to use lethal force in order to get in trouble there. So, I mean, it's just a simple example. You make it so that it's not risky for criminals to go and commit crimes. You have it so they can steal like $950 worth of stuff, and maybe they'll just get a ticket, and then they go and sell it on eBay. It's just a cost of doing business. and they can make large profits from doing that. So guess what? You have a lot of theft that occurs there. You have Walmart closes down in San Francisco, CVS, Walgreens closed down. And the stores that remain open have everything behind glass, so that you have to go and ask somebody for help to go and open it up so you can go and look at the different products that are there. This is very costly. It's just makes it much more costly for you to buy the products, and it makes it much less convenient. Look, people talk about the direct costs of crime. But you often have discussions for these district attorneys, these Soros-backed district attorneys, is that they want the prison population to reflect the general population. So if 13% of the general population is black, only 13% of the people in prison should be black. Same with Hispanics, same with other groups, and whites. And but that people don't commit crimes in exact proportions to their shares of the population. And I can understand why you want to go and help certain groups, but the problem is that they're hurting the very groups that they claim that they care about. Who do you think people commit crimes against? They commit crimes against people who are very similar. About 90% of blacks are murdered by other blacks. You have very high percentages for Hispanics that are murdered by other Hispanics. And so, the issue that you face here is that you may help out certain groups of criminals, but if you really care about minorities, you're hurting them because they're the victims of crime. But they're, as I said, they're victims much more broadly than just the direct victims of crime. So, for example, people commit crimes near where they live. So who do you think owns some of the businesses in those areas? Who do you think shops in the businesses that get closed down? Who do you think works in those stores? They're the same type of people in terms of race, in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds. Who do you think owns homes in those areas whose property values are depressed because of the higher crime that's there? All those things. They claim that they care about the poor, that they care about minorities, and yet those are the people who get harmed, and not just directly from the crimes, but get harmed in many other indirect ways.
CrimeResearch.org is the website. We've got to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about solutions. How can we fight back when so much of the localized government via these DAs has been captured? And then you have people like Newsom who are at the top in California. It's making sense of the madness, and we'll be back after this. And we are back with Dr. John Lott. What are some of the solutions you and your organization gravitate towards? Is there a way to take this back at the ballot box, or do we just continue to have to shine the light through activism, shows like this one, speaking out, books, traditional and alternative media? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's not rocket science. You just have to make it risky for criminals to go and commit crimes. And you can do that in many ways. Higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences. You have to have a combination of all those. You can also make it so that victims are able to go and defend themselves. That also makes it riskier for criminals to go and commit crimes. But, people, all those things, policing policies and gun control laws, as you're indicating, are determined by who you elect, who are the politicians that you put into office that determine what the rules for the policing are. And it's also the judges that get elected and appointed in different places. So, it's not too surprising that in areas of the country where you have Democratic control in the counties, you have much higher murder rates that occur, many times higher. Even in the so-called Republican states that have high murder rates, it's usually tiny areas within those states which are driving the overall murder rates there. And those are the areas within those states which are controlled by Democrats. Law enforcement is a local issue. Policing, the policies the police have, the funding for police are determined locally. The judges are elected locally overwhelmingly. The district attorneys are elected overwhelmingly locally. So whether somebody's arrested, whether somebody's charged, whether somebody is sentenced and what they're sentenced to, all those things are determined locally. In many local areas, they're basically determining, what the bail will be, if there'll even be bail.
So when we are talking about red states or places within the country that do have low crime rates, low murder rates, what are some of the examples? And then what are some of the red states that have those Democratic cities or zones that have that prevalent crime?
Well, I mean, it's very easy to identify them. You look at Missouri, for example. I can't remember the exact murder rate, but it's like over 10 per 100,000. And but you look at St. Louis County, they have a murder rate that's been close to 50 per 100,000. Kansas City, on the other side of the state, is also very high. You look at Louisiana, they also have an overall murder rate that's over 10 per 100,000. But again, it's driven primarily by a couple places in the state. Where New Orleans is, the parish that's there, also has a murder rate that's about 50 per 100,000. At the state level, you may determine broadly what the penalties will be. If somebody commits a certain type of crime, they may face up to so many years in prison. But whether the police have the resources and the rules to go and arrest people, whether prosecutors decide to prosecute them, and whether judges, what they sentence them to, all those are overwhelmingly local decisions that are there.
So when we're talking about gun rights currently in the United States, where do you think we are, and where do you think we're headed in the future? Obviously, I don't think that Biden's running the country, but he has continually spoke about firearms being restricted, assault weapons, weapons of war is one of the mantras of the Democratic Party. Where are we, and where do you see us going?
Well, I mean, Biden's had a huge impact already on gun ownership in the United States. He's put literally thousands of gun dealers out of business with his so-called zero tolerance policy. I mean, he sells this as going after rogue gun dealers that try to sell guns out of the back of their stores secretly to criminals. Nothing could be further from the truth. If he actually has evidence on that, fine, go after him on that. Nobody wants that to happen. But the types of people he's going after are ones who make trivial, inconsequential paperwork mistakes. You make one tiny paperwork mistake that doesn't really matter for anything, and they'll take away your license to be able to be a firearms dealer. There's an example from Texas where a man, a firearms dealer, 16 and 17 years ago, had made one tiny paperwork mistake on two different forms, where he had transposed a couple letters in a word, and the Obama administration had looked at it and said, these are trivial, and closed the books on it. The guy's made no other paperwork mistake in the last 16 years. And yet the Biden administration has gone back and reopened those two cases that the Obama administration had closed, and had used those to go and take away his license to be a firearms dealer. You have thousands of those types of cases across the country. And then on the other side, for large dealers, and some of those are large dealers, they're imposing many new paperwork reporting requirements on them, making it much more costly for them to go and do business. If you sell 25 guns that are traced, and tracing doesn't mean that they were actually used in a crime. In fact, many of them probably weren't involved in a crime. It's one thing if you have 25 guns that are traced and you sold 25 guns. It's another thing if you're a large retailer where you may sell 10,000 or 12,000 guns over the course of a year, or 30 or 40,000 over the course of 3 years that they're looking at. And you have 25 of them are traced. And yet, those are the ones that they're overwhelmingly picking up, these large retailers, and imposing really heavy costs on them to try to make it so it's not profitable for them to continue to sell those types of guns. And so, that's just one area where the Biden administration's done it. They tried to institute rules that would ban federal funding for schools that would have hunter safety courses or archery classes. Fortunately, even the Democrats in Congress, that was a step too far for the Biden administration. But now they're putting forward new regulations that would make it illegal for you to privately transfer your gun. If a father's going to give his son a gun that he has or other things, they're going to, under these rules, at least from what has been put out by leakers at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, you're going to have to get registered as a firearms dealer, which is kind of ironic. At the same time, they're putting all these firearms dealers out of business. But they just basically want to make it costly for people to get guns, but they also want to complete their national gun registry. 2 years ago, it was reported that the Biden administration had put together a computerized database of almost 1 billion transactions involving guns. But those primarily involved older transactions. And so what they've been doing is they've been trying to put pressure on dealers to provide information on current transfers. They've gotten banks like Bank of America, for example, to turn over credit card records to the government so they can find out about current purchases that people are making in order to try to create a large gun registry that's there. And, they claim that it's important for being able to go and solve crimes, but outside of TV shows, it really doesn't work. Because, in theory, if a criminal leaves a gun at a crime scene and it's registered to the criminal who committed the crime, you can trace the gun back to the criminal and solve the crime. In fact, crime guns are virtually never left at the crime scene. And the few times that they are, it's because the criminal's either been seriously wounded or killed, so you've caught them anyway. And the once or twice beyond that they're left there at the crime scene, they're not registered to the person who committed the crime. And the once or twice that they are registered, they're not registered to the person who committed the crime. And so, you can look across the country. We have places that have had registration, licensing of guns for decades, and yet they can't point to any crimes involving the guns that they've been able to go and solve. They've spent tens of millions of dollars annually in some of these places to go and run the systems, and yet, and they've taken police time away from things that we know work and put it into things that don't work.
One final question before you go. If, in fact, another Democratic administration comes into the presidency, can gun rights survive the next 4 years? And what would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, I worry whether that will be the case. I mean, right now, what you have is the Supreme Court is kind of the ultimate bulwark to try to protect people's ability to go and defend themselves and their families. But Democrats at the end of this year are going to have almost 70% of the district and circuit court judges across the country. You can pretty much tell which way a judge is going to rule on these issues simply by who appointed them. Were they appointed by Democrats or Republicans? By the end of the next term, Clarence Thomas will be 80. Sam Alito will be 78. Those are the two most pro-self-defense justices on the Supreme Court. If you lose one or both of them, you're going to have a radically different Supreme Court than you have had right now. But, you know, as we've been talking about, there are many other things that are going on. You've had literally thousands of gun dealers put out of business under their zero tolerance policy. The Biden administration has revived Operation Choke Point, which the federal government puts pressure on financial institutions not to do business with industries from energy to firearms to cattle that they don't like. I mean, go try running a business if you don't have financial institutions which are willing to handle the checks for your customers or are willing to go and handle credit cards. Are there workarounds that you can do? Yeah, but they're much more costly, and they make it so that many of these companies go out of business.
Dr. John Lott, thank you so much. CrimeResearch.org is the website. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to be talking the border with Cheryl Chumley. You're not going to want to miss it. Back after this with more Making Sense of the Madness.